After months of planning the perfect wedding, I found out he'd been telling everyone it was never real. My name is Claire, I'm 31 years old, and until recently, I thought I was about to marry the love of my life. I come from a small coastal town in Maine, the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you've even finished telling your best friend. My parents have been together for over 35 years, and I grew up believing that love, real love, was something that could survive anything. When I met Evan, I genuinely thought I had found that kind of love. He was charming, attentive, and confident in a way that drew people in. I fell for him quickly, almost recklessly, like a wave crashing against the shore. We met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's engagement party in Portland. I remember the way he made me laugh, how he seemed to listen so intently to everything I said. At the time, I had just started a new job as a marketing coordinator for a small publishing company, and he was running his own design studio. He was ambitious, creative, and had that quiet confidence that made everyone around him feel safe. I was cautious at first. I'd been through a messy breakup a year earlier, but he had a way of making me feel like the world slowed down when we were together. Within 6 months, we moved in together. Within a year, we were engaged. The proposal was perfect, or at least it seemed that way then. We were on a trip to Vermont, staying in a cabin surrounded by maple trees that glowed orange and red in the fall light. He cooked dinner, lit candles, and when I turned to grab the wine glasses, he was already on one knee. I remember feeling like I was floating, like every hard thing that had ever happened to me finally made sense, because it had led me to that moment. When I called my parents that night, my mom cried, and my dad told Evan that he couldn't wait to officially welcome him into the family. The wedding planning started almost immediately. I had always imagined a small ceremony, close friends, family, something intimate. But Evan had bigger ideas. He said we deserved a celebration that reflected who we were, something grand but personal. I hesitated, thinking about the cost, but he brushed it off, saying he would take care of everything. It felt good for a while to let myself dream. We toured venues, tasted cakes, sent out save, the dates with our smiling faces printed in soft gold lettering. Every step of the way, I was fully invested. I made spreadsheets, mood boards, even playlists for every part of the day. I wanted everything to be perfect, not because I cared about showing off, but because I wanted to create something meaningful. I wanted to look back and feel that the day had captured who we were together. Evan seemed just as involved, though there were small things that didn't quite fit. Sometimes, when I asked him about his guest list, he'd say he hadn't finalized it yet, or he'd change details last minute, claiming his business had new clients he needed to impress by inviting them. Once, when my cousin asked him about our wedding date, he joked that we were still keeping our options open. Everyone laughed, including me, though I remember feeling a flicker of discomfort. When I mentioned it later, he smiled and said he was just being funny, that people took things too seriously. I shrugged it off. You do that when you're in love. You make excuses for little things because you want to believe the best. As the months went by, the planning intensified. My weekends were filled with appointments, dress fittings, floral consultations, cake tastings. My best friend, Dana, was my maid of honor, and she was endlessly supportive. Even when I started stressing about the guest count or the seating chart, she was the one who calmed me down when I found out the caterer had accidentally booked another event on our date. Evan didn't seem too worried. He told me to relax and trust that everything would work out. But around that time, I started to notice a shift in him. He grew more distant, distracted. When I'd ask him about his day, he'd answer vaguely or change the subject. I thought maybe work was stressing him out. He said one of his clients had been difficult, that he was just tired. I wanted to believe him, so I did. About 2 months before the wedding, we had our engagement photos taken at a nearby lighthouse. The photographer, a friend of mine, captured us laughing as the wind tangled my hair. When I looked at those photos later, I couldn't shake the feeling that my smile looked real, but his didn't. His eyes looked elsewhere. It was subtle, but the longer I stared, the more it bothered me. Still, I convinced myself that I was just overanalyzing. The first real sign that something was wrong came from a completely unexpected place. I was at a small cafe one afternoon, meeting with the florist, when a mutual acquaintance stopped by my table. Her name was Hannah, someone I'd known from town, though we weren't particularly close. She congratulated me on the upcoming wedding and then, with an awkward pause, said she had run into Evan recently at a networking event. I smiled, assuming it was just a casual mention, until she added that Evan had said something that confused her. Apparently he had introduced me not as his fiancé but as his longtime partner, and when someone asked about the wedding, he said, laughing, that it was just a fun thing they were doing. At first I laughed too, thinking maybe she had misunderstood. But when I got home and told Evan about it, he grew defensive. He said people always twisted his words, that he probably said something jokingly and it got taken the wrong way. His tone was sharp, irritated that I even brought it up. I apologized, feeling foolish for doubting him, and we dropped it. But something inside me didn't settle. As the wedding date approached, more strange comments started surfacing. My coworker mentioned that one of Evan's friends had told him the whole thing was big social event for networking. Another said Evan had been joking that he wasn't sure how long he could keep pretending to be a groom. Each time I heard something like that, I tried to laugh it off, but inside, a quiet panic was growing. I told myself it was just nerves, that maybe I was projecting my anxiety onto him. But late at night, when I lay beside him, I would hear him sigh in his sleep or roll away from me, and I'd wonder if the man I loved was slowly becoming someone I didn't know. The breaking point came about 3 weeks before the wedding. My parents were throwing a small pre-wedding dinner, and they invited some of Evan's family. His parents lived out of state and couldn't make it, but his younger sister, Ava, attended. She was friendly, a bit blunt but kind-hearted. Over dinner, after a few glasses of wine, she started chatting with my mom about how excited everyone was for the big day. Then, casually, she said something that froze me in place. She mentioned that Evan had told his family not to make travel arrangements because it wasn't an actual wedding. She said he had described it as more of a branding event, a photo shoot for his business, something to boost visibility. The room went silent, my mom blinked in confusion, and I felt my stomach drop. I looked at Ava, thinking maybe I had misheard her, but she was nodding earnestly, completely unaware of what she had just revealed. When I turned to Evan, his expression said it all: panic, guilt, shock. I didn't confront him then, not in front of everyone, but I barely made it through the rest of the evening. My hands were shaking as I cleared dishes, my heart racing so fast I thought I might faint. Later that night, when we were finally alone, I demanded an explanation. That was the night I began to realize everything I thought was real might have been an illusion. That night felt endless. The minute the door closed behind us, I turned to Evan, my voice trembling, asking him what Ava had meant. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to come up with the right version of a lie. His face went pale, then shifted into something cold and detached. He said I was overreacting, that Ava didn't know what she was talking about, that it was all some misunderstanding. But I could hear the defensiveness in his tone, the way his voice wavered slightly, betraying a layer of panic he couldn't hide. I pushed back. I asked why people were saying he told them the wedding wasn't real, why his own sister thought it was a branding event, why friends had mentioned he was calling it good publicity. Each question I asked seemed to strip away a layer of his composure. Finally, after what felt like hours of going in circles, he sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples like he was the one being wronged. He said that people had taken things out of context, that he had joked to some colleagues that the wedding would be a great opportunity for exposure for his business because photographers and designers would be attending. He said he never meant it literally, that everyone was twisting his words, but his eyes avoided mine the entire time. When I pressed him again, asking him to just tell me the truth, he finally snapped. He admitted that, yes, he had talked about the wedding in a different way to certain people. He said that in his industry, appearances mattered and positioning it as a large-scale event helped attract attention. He claimed it was strategic, that it was still real, that he just needed to market it differently for professional reasons. He spoke with the tone of someone trying to sound rational, but every word he said chipped away at something inside me. I remember sitting on the edge of the dresser, gripping the fabric of my dress so tightly that my hands hurt. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had poured months of energy, love, and savings into this wedding, our wedding, and he was treating it like a networking stunt. When I asked him if he'd ever actually planned to marry me, he didn't answer. He just looked at me with this blank, exhausted expression, like he wished I would stop asking questions. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. Eventually, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor, shaking. My reflection in the mirror looked unrecognizable, eyes swollen, mascara smudged, face pale. I couldn't process it all at once. Part of me wanted to believe that he had made a mistake, that he was just overwhelmed or confused, that this wasn't as bad as it sounded. But deep down I knew, you don't tell people your wedding isn't real unless some part of you actually means it. When I came out, Evan had fallen asleep on the couch, his laptop open beside him, work emails glowing on the screen like nothing had happened. I walked past him, grabbed a blanket, and slept in the guest room. I didn't cry. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me quietly collapse. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee, asked if I wanted toast, talked about a client meeting he had that day. I couldn't believe the casualness in his voice, as if the night before had been some small argument about flowers or catering. When I confronted him again, asking if we were still actually getting married, he looked annoyed. He said of course we were, that I needed to stop dramatizing things. That day, I called my best friend Donna and told her everything. She listened quietly, then said what I was too scared to say out loud, that it sounded like he was never serious about the marriage in the first place. She reminded me of all the small signs I had ignored. The evasive comments, the nervous jokes, the way he always seemed more excited about the aesthetics of the event than the actual commitment. I wanted to defend him, but the words wouldn't come. Over the next week, things between Evan and me became unbearable. We barely spoke, and when we did, it turned into tense, clipped exchanges. I tried to get him to sit down and talk honestly, but he kept brushing me off. He said he was too busy, too stressed, that we'd sort everything out after the wedding. But that didn't make sense anymore. What was there to sort out if he didn't even consider it real? Then came the text message that broke everything wide open. It was a Tuesday evening, and he had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but it buzzed repeatedly, 5, 6, 7 times in a row. Out of instinct more than curiosity, I glanced at the screen. It was a group chat notification, one that included several names I recognized from his design studio. The most recent message read, "Can't believe you're still keeping this wedding thing going. Just tell her already, man." My hands started trembling as I scrolled through the thread. The conversation went back weeks. They joked about the wedding like it was a production, something staged for attention. One of them even asked if I was in on it, to which Evan replied, "She's too emotionally invested to pull out now. It'll be fine." Another said, "As long as you get the photos, no one will care." I couldn't breathe. My mind went white, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. When Evan came out of the shower, towel draped over his shoulders, he froze the moment he saw me holding his phone. He didn't even try to defend himself this time. He just sighed, muttered something like "you weren't supposed to see that," and sank onto a chair. That's when he told me everything. He admitted that he never intended to actually marry me. That, at least not yet, as he put it. He said his business had been struggling financially, and he'd realized that throwing a grand wedding could serve as a way to attract attention and clients. He said that making it look like a massive event would bring publicity, partnerships, even sponsors. He'd used our relationship as the centerpiece for a marketing campaign. I remember standing there, frozen, as he explained this like it was a business decision. He said he thought we could get married. For real. Later, once things stabilized, that I shouldn't take it so personally. My voice broke when I asked him how long he'd been planning this, and he said from almost the beginning of the engagement, every memory of us, the proposal, the plans, the dreams, suddenly felt fake, manufactured, like I had been living in a commercial for a love that didn't exist. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely a whisper. I told him to leave. At first, he refused, saying we should talk about it like adults, but the look on my face must have said enough. He packed a bag, muttering to himself about how I was overreacting, and walked out. The silence that filled the apartment after he left was suffocating. The decorations, the invitations stacked on the counter, the dress hanging in the closet, they all mocked me. Every corner of that apartment felt tainted with deceit. That night, I called off the wedding. My hands shook as I contacted the vendors, explaining that it wouldn't be happening. Some of them were kind, offering sympathy. Others were more businesslike, talking about cancellation fees. I didn't care. I just wanted it all gone. The next morning, I told my parents. My mother cried quietly, while my father clenched his jaw and said he'd always had a bad feeling about Evan. I couldn't bear to face anyone else for days. Messages flooded in from friends and family, asking what had happened, but I ignored them all. I needed time to process how someone I loved so completely could turn me into a prop for his ambition. In the following days, I tried to piece together the truth. I went through old emails, contracts, and social media posts. The more I looked, the clearer it became that he had meticulously planned the illusion. The photographers, the designer partnership, even the location. Everything had been chosen not for sentiment but for exposure. He had used me as the emotional centerpiece of a brand campaign. The man I thought I was going to marry had been acting the entire time, and I was finally starting to understand just how deep his deception ran. The night after I found the messages, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. His words, my name twisted into a joke, the way he referred to me as the placeholder. My chest hurt so badly I thought something was physically wrong with me. By morning, my reflection in the mirror barely looked like me anymore. My eyes were swollen, my hair tangled, and my skin was pale. I looked like a stranger living inside my own body. That day, I didn't confront him. I couldn't. I told myself I needed more proof that maybe I had misinterpreted the tone or the context. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to accept it yet. Instead, I went through our shared messages again, comparing them to what he sent to others. The differences were staggering. With me, he was often distant, replies short and cold. But with his friends, he was funny, confident, almost charming. It was like I'd been dating a version of him he didn't even want to be. 2 days passed before I finally said something. We were sitting on the couch, going through the list of final wedding details, seating charts, playlists, flower arrangements. I stared at him while he was scrolling on his phone, pretending to care, and something inside me snapped. I asked him directly if he had ever told anyone the wedding wasn't real. He froze, phone halfway to his face, and for a moment I thought maybe he'd deny it. But then his expression changed. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said something that made my stomach drop. He said I was overreacting, that I shouldn't have been snooping through his private conversations, and that the jokes were just him venting about the stress of planning. He said everyone jokes about marriage being hard, that I was taking it too seriously. But the problem wasn't the jokes, it was the way he'd said them, like he didn't believe a word of what we'd built together. Like it was all a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know it was pretend. I tried to explain how hurtful it was, but he kept cutting me off, saying things like, "You're being emotional," and "I can't deal with this right now." At one point, he actually stood up, grabbed his keys, and said he was going for a drive to clear his head. He left me sitting there, surrounded by half-finished decorations and a stack of RSVP cards that suddenly felt meaningless. I remember just staring at the door after he left, wondering how something that had once felt so solid could suddenly feel so fragile. When he came back hours later, he acted like nothing had happened. He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, poured himself a drink, and asked if I wanted takeout. I didn't even know how to respond. I asked him if we were really just going to ignore what had happened, and he shrugged, saying he didn't want to fight anymore. I wanted to believe that meant he cared, but it didn't. It meant he was done discussing it, not that he was sorry. Over the next week, things got weirder. He became quieter, less affectionate, almost robotic. When friends came over, he turned back into his charming self, laughing and telling stories, but the moment they left, he went silent again. I tried to ask if he was still having doubts about the wedding, but he'd just brush me off or change the subject. One evening, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I called his sister Nora. She and I had become close over the last 2 years, and I trusted her more than almost anyone else. I told her I felt like something was wrong, that he was distant, that I'd found things that didn't make sense. She went quiet for a long time before saying she didn't think I was imagining things. Then she hesitated and admitted that he'd told their family the engagement was complicated. When I asked what that meant, she said she didn't know, but the way she said it told me she did. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just between us. He had been planting seeds of doubt everywhere long before I ever noticed. He'd told his friends it was a trial run, joked to his coworkers that the wedding was more her idea than his, and apparently told his parents that he wasn't sure if it would actually happen. I was the only one still living in the illusion. The next day, I went to his apartment while he was at work. My hands were shaking the entire time I searched through his things, not because I wanted to find something, but because I already knew I would, and I did. Buried in his desk drawer was a printed out version of a prenup draft I'd never seen before, one that wasn't the version we'd agreed to. It included clauses that made it sound like the marriage wasn't legally binding yet, like it was a formality or placeholder, until something official happened later. I didn't even know that was possible. But the signature lines were blank, and seeing them that way made me realize something terrifying. Maybe he never intended to sign at all. I left the papers where I found them and sat on the edge of his bed, trying to make sense of it all. I thought about the nights he told me I was his future, the mornings we'd woken up tangled in each other's arms, the months I'd spent picking out the perfect dress, the invitations, the vows. It all suddenly felt like theater. That night, I didn't confront him. I couldn't. Instead, I called my mom. She could tell from my voice that something was wrong, and when I told her, she went completely silent. After a moment, she said she had never liked how fast things had moved with him, but she didn't want to interfere. She told me to come home for a few days, just to think. I packed a small bag and left before he got home. I didn't leave a note. I needed space to breathe, to understand what I was actually dealing with. When I arrived at my mom's house, she hugged me so tightly I almost broke down right there. For the first time in months, I felt safe. But the safety was temporary because a part of me knew I couldn't just stay there forever. I had to decide what to do next, cancel the wedding, confront him, or find out once and for all what was really going on behind his words. The next morning, I woke up to 20 unread messages from him. The first few were angry, asking where I was, accusing me of running away, demanding that I grow up, but by the end, his tone changed. He said he was sorry that he didn't mean what he said to his friends, that I was the only person he wanted to be with. I wanted to believe it. I really did. But after everything I'd seen, his words didn't sound like love anymore. They sounded like damage control. And that's when I decided I needed proof, not just hints, not just suspicion, real, undeniable proof of what he'd been saying about me and about our relationship. I knew it would hurt, but I also knew that without it, I'd always wonder if I'd been wrong. So, I made a plan. I was going to find out exactly what he'd been telling everyone, even if it meant breaking my own heart in the process. When I went back to the apartment that weekend, I didn't go as his fiancé. I went as someone who finally needed to see the truth laid bare. I had decided to confront him face to face, but only after I'd gathered everything I needed. My friend Elise came with me, partly for emotional backup, partly because she'd seen the messages too and refused to let me face him alone. The place looked the same as I'd left it. The half-finished seating chart still taped to the wall, the white bouquet mock-ups drying on the kitchen counter, but the air felt different. He wasn't there, which was both a relief and a warning. I opened his laptop, logged in with the password I already knew, and began to dig. At first it was the same old threads of meaningless chatter, group messages about bachelor party plans, banter with his coworkers. Then, buried in one chat from a few weeks ago, I found a screenshot that made my knees give out. It was a picture of our engagement photo, the one we'd taken at the lake during sunset. But the caption he'd sent along with it said, "She really believes this is happening. I should get an award for acting." He'd added a laughing emoji after it, and his friend had replied, "Man, you're too deep now. You'll have to actually go through with it or fake a breakup before the date." Or fake a breakup. That's what I had become, a situation to be managed, not a person to be loved. Elise grabbed my shoulder and whispered that we should just leave, but I couldn't. I needed to understand why. There were more messages, more proof. He had told one of his close friends that the wedding was social experiment, that he was testing how far someone would go to prove love when the other side wasn't real. It sounded like something ripped out of a cruel psychology thesis, not a relationship. He'd written that he wanted to see if I would still follow through even if she knew deep down I didn't love her the same way. Reading those words didn't just hurt. They rewired how I saw every single moment of our relationship. Every fight, every kiss, every whispered promise, it all became data points in his experiment. That's when I heard the door open. He walked in, surprised but not alarmed, as if he'd expected me to come back eventually. When he saw Elise standing behind me, his expression shifted from confusion to annoyance. He told her to leave. She refused. I looked straight at him and asked if any of it had ever been real. He didn't answer immediately. He sat down on the couch, leaned back, and sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said the wedding had gotten out of control, that it had started as a concept, and that I'd taken it too seriously. A concept. He said I'd made him feel trapped in something he didn't even want, that he hadn't meant to hurt me, that he just wanted to see how it would play out. It was like listening to someone talk about a role they'd gotten tired of playing. He said he thought I needed the fantasy, that he'd gone along with it to make me happy, but when people started asking questions, he had to save face. At one point, he actually laughed and said he never thought I'd go through with the whole wedding, that he'd assumed I'd call it off once I realized how detached he was. I felt something inside me snap. My voice was shaking when I told him I had seen everything, the messages, the jokes, the lies. His smirk disappeared. He started to backpedal, saying he hadn't meant any of it, that he was just trying to sound cool to his friends. But when I told him I'd seen the part about the experiment, his face changed completely. His eyes went flat, cold, like he'd been caught mid-performance and couldn't improvise his way out. That was the moment I realized there was no explanation that would make any of it okay. There was no hidden truth or emotional reason behind what he'd done. He had just done it because he could, because control, to him, was love. I told him it was over, that I would cancel everything, that he could deal with the fallout on his own. He didn't try to stop me. He just sat there, arms crossed, saying I'd regret embarrassing him. Elise grabbed my hand and we left. The following days were chaos. I called every vendor, every guest, every relative. My hands shook as I told them the wedding was off, and most people didn't even ask why. They just said they were sorry and wished me peace. But his friends started messaging me, saying he was telling everyone I'd had a breakdown, that I'd imagined the whole thing. For a while, I felt like I was living in a fog of humiliation. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with people wanting to know what had happened. My mother wanted to drive to his apartment and scream at him, but I told her not to. He wasn't worth even that. Then, one night, I decided to take back my voice. I wrote everything down, the timeline, the messages, the fake prenup, the screenshots. I sent it to the small group of people who had been directly involved: his parents, his sister, the close friends who had been helping with the wedding. I didn't write it out of spite. I wrote it because I wanted the truth to be known, to strip him of the illusion he'd built. The fallout was instant. His sister called me, sobbing, apologizing. His parents were horrified. Apparently, he'd told them I'd pressured him into everything, that I was obsessive and unstable. When they saw the proof, they stopped defending him. He called me the next day, leaving a voicemail where he alternated between rage and tears, begging me to take it all back. I never replied. It took months to start feeling like a person again. For a long time, I couldn't look at wedding invitations or even walk past bridal shops without feeling sick. Every future plan felt tainted. I went to therapy. I started journaling. Elise made sure I ate and left the house once in a while. But the hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was forgiving myself for believing in something that wasn't real. I kept replaying the moments when I could have seen it, when the signs were right there and I looked away. The way he avoided eye contact when I talked about the honeymoon. The way he dismissed my excitement over the details. The way he never once said he was happy, just ready. A few months later, I moved out of the city. I got a new job, smaller apartment, quieter life. For the first time, I wasn't building something for someone else. I was just living for me. I still have the dress folded carefully in a box. Not because I'm holding onto it, but because it reminds me of what I survived, of the version of myself who still believed in happy endings, even after everything. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself wondering what he tells people now. Maybe he's rewritten the story again. Maybe he tells them I was just a phase, a lesson, a mistake. But it doesn't matter anymore. His story can change as much as he wants. Mine is finally my own. The wedding never happened, but in a strange way, something more important did. I found out what I would never tolerate again. I learned that love without honesty isn't love at all. It's theater. And I walked out before the final act, before the curtain fell, before I could forget who I was beneath the costume he built for me. And maybe that's the real ending I was meant to have.